Hey, it is great to see everyone this morning. We are going to be in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. If you don't have your Bible with you, you can use the BCN Bible. If you don't have one at all, that is our gift to you, or you can follow along online. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Today, we are in the fifth and second to last part of our Fire Within series. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to start to tie some of this stuff together that we have covered in previous weeks. So you'll kind of see how these different things fit in and what all we're going through. And this is what I'm going to ask. We're going to cover a lot of things today. What I'm going to do originally is I'm going to it'll seem a little scattered, but I need to set the foundation in a couple different areas. So we're going to look at like 7 verses, and then as we set the foundation, then we'll kind of run and it'll really get rolling after that. But this is what I'm going to ask is, as we're going through all this different stuff, so you don't get lost, so you don't get confused as to where you're headed, I want you to have an image in your head, and the image is of the torch bearer for the Olympics. The title of today is Torches. And so if you're getting confused, I just need that image to be in your head of someone running with the torch to someone else, lighting their torch, and then it continues on to the path where the Olympic flame is lit. Does anyone love the Olympics? The only one? Like, the United States won gold in men's curling. Yeah! I know! If that is as enthusiastic as you get in this whole message, I just want to tell you, I'm going to walk out of here depressed. Like, that's what's going to take place. So this is what's going on in the passage, so you understand what's going into it. This is Paul, who has planted churches all over the first century world. He is writing back to the church in Corinth. In the section that we're going to look at, he is writing specifically about an offering that they were taking. Now, we are reading a passage on an offering, but we are not taking an offering. I just want to make sure that we're really clear on that, because sometimes those of you who have been in church for a while, you like really prep yourself, like, oh, he said community, we're talking about groups. He said inviting, we're talking about inviting. Oh, offering, oh, we're taking a big offering. We're not taking a big offering, okay? So you can just set yourself at ease, unless if your checkbook was already out, then we'll have you can come up after service and we'll have conversations, and that'll be good. But the offering that he's talking about is for the believers back in Jerusalem. So when Paul left Jerusalem to plant all these different churches, there was great need in Jerusalem, and so they asked that they would take an offering to help the needs in Jerusalem, and it just became this really cool thing that kind of had this commonality and this common vision of all these churches, that they were together on this one thing. So that's the background of what we're going to look at. Again, first 6 verses, we need to set the foundation and talk about a couple different things, and then we'll really see where this passage moves after that. So 2 Corinthians chapter 8, starting in verse 1, and it says this: "Now, I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia." This will be important later. He is bragging on the churches in Macedonia. So he is writing to the church in Corinth to brag on the churches in Macedonia. But the church in Corinth isn't upset about this, because it's like an oldest child. It got plenty of attention. It's fine. Its parents said that it was good. It's not like a middle child who got neglected in different ways. I'm a middle child. Let's keep going. Kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia. They are being tested by many troubles. This is their description. They are being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor, but they are also filled with abundant joy. He gives 3 descriptors of these group of people in Macedonia. He says they're being tested. Their life is really difficult right now. They are also very poor. They do not have abundant resources. They do not have more than most people. They are very poor, but they also have abundant joy. He says, hey, of these 3 descriptors, of their being tested, of their being very poor, and yet of their abundant joy, which one do they act on in this moment? It says, no, they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity. Now, this is awesome. He's saying that in this moment, their external life is incredibly difficult, and yet they are not acting upon the difficulty in their external life. They are acting on what God has done deeper within them. This is so important to understand. He's saying, no, what God has done within them is stronger and greater than anything that the world can do to them. There's this story of Jesus, which I just find absolutely fascinating, in which he has gone with his disciples over a period of time, and they've come up to this well in this area, and his disciples go off to find food because they had no food for a while. And it says Jesus talks to a lady who was there, and he ministers to her, and he speaks into her struggle, and he really, in essence, leads her to faith. And then after she goes away, the disciples come back, and they just kind of like, what's going on? He'd been talking to this lady, what's happening? And they ask him if he wants food, and Jesus simply says, he goes, I have food that you don't know about. Saying that, no, what I have just done, the ministry that I've been a part of helping this person is more important than any physical appetite that I could possibly have. And the disciples, they're so dense, they don't get it. They just go, who gave him food? Like, did someone bring him nuggets? Like, what's happening here? Who gave him food? No, what Jesus is saying here, he goes, no. What you need to understand is God is doing something within you that external circumstances can't take. They can't grasp them from you. I used to think scripture was kind of callous when it would say, rejoice always. It says it over and over again, rejoice always. And I think, like, do you know where some people are? Like, some people are barely getting in here. And you're saying rejoice always? It's not calloused. Because it's understanding that the abundant joy that God is stirring within you is stronger than any obstacle, than any person, than any relationship that goes south, than any difficulty you're facing in your work. No, the abundant joy within you is stronger than absolutely anything that you face. And so this is where he begins. He continues. He says, for I can testify that they gave not only what they could afford, but far more. And they did it of their own free will. They begged us again and again for the privilege of sharing in the gift for the believers in Jerusalem. Now, the sharing in the gift is the giving. So they're saying they begged again and again that they could continue to give to the believers in Jerusalem, that they saw that as the sharing and the gift. And I understood this entirely because we're doing this whole First Step campaign right now where we're going to remodel the lobby in the kids area, and it starts March 12th is when that's actually going to kick off. And there was an instance where we had a guy come to us, and he came in and he just said, hey, I'd like to give. And we said, oh, thank you, you can pledge. And he pledged, and he said, I'd like to pledge again. I was like, oh, okay, you can pledge again, that's fine. And he begged to give more and more and more, and he just kept asking, no, I just keep wanting to give more. And then I woke up. And I came to church. I don't know how to end that story, anything else. So begged to share in the gift of the believers in Jerusalem. They even did more than we had hoped. Now this is important. For their first action, turn to your neighbor, say first action. Their first action was to give themselves to the Lord and to us, just as God wanted them to do. Now I want to pull this together. First action was to give themselves to the Lord and to us. And so he's saying the first thing that they did, the very first thing that took place was not the giving of the offering, but their commitment to Christ, and they're giving their lives to him. And so here's the deal. So as a church, we invite every single week for you to accept Jesus as the center of your life. And I want you to know, we are going to keep doing that over and over and over again. Because if you walk in and it may be your first time, it may be your 100th time, if you have not made that decision, that is the foundation and center from which everything else comes from. We talked a couple weeks ago, we used this image of a pilot light. That having God in your life is the equivalent of a pilot light. That it's your responsibility to grow the flame, but if the pilot light is not lit, there is no fire that's going to occur. There is no flame that's going to take place. And that is what happens when we accept Jesus as our Savior. And so if you attempt to live the Christian life without the strength of Christ working within you, you're going to be exhausted. You're going to absolutely get worn out. And so it is important to understand that order matters. Before we do, we need to confess. Like before we go and live, we need to have convictions that it is God who saved us and God who enables us to live. I heard a preacher say this years ago. I thought this was absolutely brilliant. He says, when I say that I have the Spirit of God in me, I'm not saying that I'm better than you. He said, what I'm saying when I have the Spirit of God in me is I'm better than me. I was like, oh, that's really, because he like took the words and he turned it on itself and it like kind of all flowed together. No, I'm better than me when God is working within me in those moments. And so he said, hey, first you need to give yourselves to God. That's what they did. But he doesn't stop there. He says, hey, this is the first thing they did is they gave themselves to God. And then they did one other thing. He says they gave themselves to God and to us. And so they didn't just stop with the confession. For those of you who are note takers, this is something to write down. Internal confessions need outward commitments. Internal confessions need outward commitments. The thing that you feel, the thing that you want to act on, the thing that you have decided, if it just stays in your heart, in your head, and it never translates out into your actions, it's going to fizzle out and you're going to struggle with it. Let me give you an example. Let's say this. Let's say I commit that I want to run a marathon, which I am not going to do because I have not lost to my mind. But let's say this. Let's say I have committed and I'm going to run a marathon and I go home and I eat 4 pizzas. Just to make sure that you didn't mishear me, I didn't say 4 pieces of pizza. I said 4 pizzas. It's not going to happen. Like it's not going to take place. And yet, let me translate that, because if I did that, you would go, well, that's of course, like you're dumb. that's not going to occur. And yet, this is where we often find ourselves. Is we'll talk about the role of passion and emotion and enthusiasm within faith, and we'll go, yes, that's what I want. I want a faith that's alive. What are you doing with it? Well, nothing. Your internal confessions need outward, external commitments. That is absolutely essential. And so he says, hey, here's the deal. This is what they did. It's not just that they gave. It's the fact that they gave after they had confessed their need for Christ and committed themselves to the people around them, and then that flowed later on. And then he gets a little more interesting in this next part. Again, we are just laying the foundation at this point in time. Verse 6. He says, so we have urged Titus, who encouraged your giving in the first place, to return to you and encourage you to finish this ministry of giving, since you excel in so many ways in your faith, you're gifted speakers. Okay, all right, we'll keep going. I just wanted to see if there was anything there. We're fine. I'm not hurt. In your faith, your gifted speakers, your knowledge, your enthusiasm. Oh, your enthusiasm. Okay, now we come up. And your love from us, I want you to excel also in this gracious act of giving. I want you to see what Paul does. This is, what he writes here is really hard because I felt this and I've lived this in the same way. What he is doing is he is keeping these people in Corinth from reaching a spiritual plateau. He's keeping them from reaching a spot where they just go, man, I hit 30 or 40 or 60 or anywhere in between or after or before all those, and I'm just done. Like that's it. That's all I grew. Because here's the tendency, and I can acknowledge this as a pastor. The tendency is when you see someone doing something and they hit a peak, they reach a plateau, you just want to go, well, you do a lot. Like, it's great. Like, thank you. Like, you're fine. No worries. But that's not what Paul does here. And it'd be easy to view this as like badgering, but he wants what is best for the people in this moment. And he goes, hey, listen, here's the deal. You excel in so many ways, but keep going. Like, don't stop with just the initial things that you've done well. Keep going within it. He goes, yeah, you have knowledge. You have enthusiasm. There's more. Like, there's more growth in your life ahead of you. And then he specifies a specific area, which is what this whole letter is about in this part. He says, I want you to excel also in this gracious act of giving. Now, here's our tendency in church. And when I say our tendency, I mean, here's my tendency. is when we talk about giving in church, we talk about giving broadly and generally because it's less pointed and it's easier for everyone to swallow and it feels easier for me to say. And we say, you need to give. You can give in a multitude of ways. Your time, your relationships, your enthusiasm, and your money. And that's kind of how it goes because it gets awkward. But here's the thing, why that is so incredibly important, that we don't do that. And we talked about this some last week. We talked about Jesus' words where he says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And he said, we usually flip it. And we think where your heart is, there your treasure will be. What you care about determines where your money goes. That's not what Jesus says. And he's absolutely brilliant. And we've seen it over and over again. He goes, no. Where your treasure is, what you give your money towards, determines what you care about. God is not after your wallet. He is after your heart. And he understands that the idol of money can create such a grip on our lives in different ways that it honestly, it strangles the work of God and what he's seeking to do because we're pursuing things and we're pursuing cash and we're pursuing status. He says, no, you need to give because your heart is too important to let that become an obstacle to your relationship with God. So if I could just step out of this passage for just a second and explain somewhat of where we are as a church and some of the things that we're going to be doing. So some of you may have noticed, especially if you've been here for a while, over the last 6 weeks, we have not taken an offering. And we did that for a couple different reasons. For one, it was just like how we were planning our services when we were taking an offering. It just always felt like really awkward. Like we had this great worship music and people are praising God. It was like, now let's bring the plates out. Here we go. And everything kind of came to a screeching halt and I just didn't like how it felt. And so we're like, let's not do that. Let's not take an offering. And I am so grateful for a leadership team at this church that gives us permission to try new things, and a church that understands that we're trying new things in order to do what's best, and also one that is equally understanding when we say, hey, we felt like we did that wrong, we'd like to bring it back. And so that's where we are now. As we say, hey, here's the problem, is we have the giving boxes in the back, and those are great if you want to use those. But man, giving is an important part of our faith. It's not just funding the mission as a church, it's an important part of our discipleship and our celebration and our worship together. So I think it's in about 3 weeks, we're going to start taking an offering again as part of the service for discipleship reasons and because that's why it matters. And just to explain a little bit, so we're going to start doing it at the end of service is where it's going to be, usually after the message. It won't always be locked in there because sometimes I like to shake it up and make things a little crazy. But it's going to be at the end of service. And so I just want to let you know in advance, those of you who really like to slip out as soon as the message is done and you like to sneak out early, I just want to tell you, it's going to look a little awkward when those plates and buckets start coming out and you start popping out and headed out. So I just want to lay that out there so you're not shy, like, oh, I have a game. And we'll all be out there and we'll be like, right, we get it. Back to the passage. So that's the foundation, okay? Let the foundation set. Now we'll jump into it. I want to look at verse 10. We're only going to be there for about 4 seconds, and then we'll come back later. Verse 10 says this. He says, here is my advice. It would be good for you to finish what you started. We would have a tendency to think that means that they didn't give, or they just barely gave. But that is actually not the case. I want to show you why. We'll come back to verse 10. If you move over, I have to flip a page. You may not have to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. It says this is incredibly important. Verse 1 and 2. He says, I really don't need to write to you about this ministry of giving for the believers in Jerusalem. For I know how eager you are to help, and I have been boasting to the churches in Macedonia that you in Greece were ready to send an offering a year ago. Now remember back here, this part started, chapter 8 started, that he's bragging about the churches in Macedonia and the way in which they gave. And so that's how it begins. He says, hey, keep giving, keep doing what you're doing. Look at the churches in Macedonia. They're struggling, they're tested, they're poor, but because of their abundant joy has resulted in generous giving. So he starts by bragging about the churches in Macedonia, but then he says, hey, where did they get this idea? He says, I know how eager you are to help, and I have been boasting to the churches in Macedonia that you in Greece were ready to send an offering. He says, the Macedonians got their motivation from the church in Corinth. Now, church in Corinth, I want you to look at the Macedonians and look at how enthusiastic they are, and I want you to remember to give as well that it's this cyclical nature that, hey, when we see how you're doing what you're doing, we are more motivated to do what we're supposed to be doing. And then you look back at us and you go, oh my goodness, look at what they're doing. That's absolutely amazing. I want to match that. I want to do exactly that same thing that what they're a part of. That it's this cyclical nature in which they're encouraging one another by their actions. But it's not simply what they're doing. This is what Paul says. This is so important. He says, in fact, it was your enthusiasm that stirred up many of the Macedonian believers to begin giving. He says it's not what you did, it's how you did what you did. It's not simply that you took action, but it was the enthusiasm with which you took that action that absolutely made a difference. Turn to your neighbor, tell him your enthusiasm matters. And when we're saying your enthusiasm matters, you better say it at least semi-enthusiastically, otherwise it really defeats the purpose. So let's try it again. Turn to your neighbor. Tell them your enthusiasm matters. There we go. We got it. Things are moving. We're doing it. I want you to just try something. Later today, if you're in a room in a crowd full of people, some of you won't be. Find a place, not a public place, not like a shopping center. That'll make sense why in just a second. When you're in a room that you have authority over in a crowd full of people, I want you to light a match. Or if you have a lighter, light a fire. And I want you to watch this, because this is amazing. We celebrated birthdays in my family not that long ago. There is chaos and craziness taking place. There are kids running everywhere. My mom lit a match. Every eye in the room turned to the match. It made just a faint sound, little bit of light. But immediately, everything just kind of stopped briefly, and everybody looked over. Because something really simple, fire attracts. That's what fire does. You drive down the road, there will be 1,000 different things that you ignore. But if there's a fire somewhere, your eye will always catch it. This is the same way in which we are called to live our faith. That our fire was meant to attract. It wasn't just what we did. It isn't just what we believe, but it's how we do the things that we do and how we believe the things that we believe. It is the way in which we live our lives that was meant to be distinctly different. He says, no. When the Macedonians, when they saw how you gave, they said, I want to be a part of that. And now I want you to look at the Macedonians and I want you to look at how they're giving. And you'll want to be a part of it because fire always attracts. This is one thing that I need you to know. You need models of passion in your life. You need models of enthusiasm in your life. It is not just enough to have people who have made some good decisions and done some right things in your life. You need people who actually enjoy it. I don't know how many of you look at someone and say, hey man, I need someone to instruct us in our marriage. I need someone to help us see what that next step looks like. This couple, how long have you been married? We've been married 60 years. How has your marriage been? We hate each other. Tell me everything you know. Like no one feels that. No one goes, no, I want the people, like I want the old couple who's still like holding hands while they're walking through Kroger. Like those are the people who I want to talk to. Those are the people I want to know, how did you do what you do? Not just the fact that they're still there, but they enjoy doing it. We laughed at this. This is going to completely defeat my point, but I've stumbled into the story in my head, and so I have no other way to go. It wasn't that long ago, we were at the Bridge Cafe, which is our church's coffee shop on the Wright State campus, and they do something called Free Wiener Wednesday. It happens on Tuesday. I still don't get it, so don't ask me to explain it. And so they have it on Tuesday, and we're there, and my whole family came, and so there's adults serving hot dogs for free to college students, and there's me, my wife, and our 4 kids. and we're just trying to corral them and keeping them from like running into the road and from destroying things and running into the fire, because in that case, fire is bad. Fire within good, fire outside sometimes bad. And so we're just like going through it. And there's this group of college, we finally got them all like corralled at a picnic table, and there's this group of college students, and I'm helping serve hot dogs, and Bethany's there, she's trying to keep all the kids together, and I can just see this group of college girls, there's about 5 of them, and they're not saying a word, they're just watching my kids, and watching Bethany try to keep my kids together. And so I walked over and I said something that was probably really awkward in the moment, but feels more awkward now for me to say to all of you. I just walked over and I said, hi, we're here from Wright State. We're part of their birth control program. I really said that. I shouldn't have. And I also shouldn't have shared this story, but here we are. And as I said, make all of you quickly want to start a family, and they're, oh, it makes us want to stay in school. And I go, I know, we're the model. But that's the reality. You need, watch me try to save it right here in this moment and bring it back. You need models of passion in your life. You need people who love what they do. Young people who are picking a career. You don't need just to find someone who has a job. You need to find someone who loves their job, who loves getting up in the morning. And that is the nature in which our faith was always meant to be lived out. Not just that we need models of passion, but we were meant to be models of passion. We were meant to be people who others would look at us and go, I don't know what they believe. I don't know what they think. I don't even know what they do, but I want what they have. Because there is something about the way in which they live their life that it's more alive than everyone else. It's different than everyone else. They seem to care more than everyone else. That is what the world needs us to be. I read years ago, Donald Miller, he wrote this book, Blue Like Jazz, and he shares this incredible story that he says, I used to always hate jazz music. I thought jazz music was boring. I thought it wasn't interesting. And then one day I was walking down the road and there was a street performer playing the saxophone and he was playing jazz music. He says, this guy, it was as if there was no one around him. He was entranced in the jazz music that he was playing. His eyes were shut. He was closed off to the world because he was so moved by the music. He says, after I saw him, I loved jazz music. I thought jazz music was amazing. And then he wrote this. This has always stuck with me. He says, sometimes you have to watch somebody love something before you can love it yourself. It is as if they are showing you the way. Man, shouldn't that be us? Shouldn't that be how we were meant to live? There's this story that has become legendary in my family that we were camping years and years ago. And if you know me at all, I don't camp well because I'm allergic to trees and grass and pollen and mosquitoes. And basically everything that's outside the inside, it doesn't do well with me. And so we're camping, it was a week, it was a struggle-filled week. And we get to the very end, and we just wanted to have a fire on the last night. And so my Uncle Bob, who was somewhat infamous in my family, my Uncle Bob goes off to get some firewood. And remember, there's not that many of us. We need a small fire to roast some marshmallows. And my Uncle Bob has a tendency of always overdoing something. Does anyone have a member in your family who always has a tendency to overdo it? Some of you are nodding, some of you are looking. There we go, I understand. So yeah, that is my Uncle Bob in our family. And so he goes off and he comes back, not with like 3 logs of firewood, which would have been sufficient and been necessary. He comes back with 4 bundles of firewood. Like he has enough firewood for a small village for a week. And we've got like 20 marshmallows left that we were looking to do. And so as the nature in which every family that camps I've understood, it usually creates some more intense moments. And so my Aunt Marilyn, who is a wonderful, mild-mannered person, stands up and to tell my Uncle Bob how foolish and dumb and ignorant he is in front of our entire family. It went well. These are the things that bring a family together. And so she goes through this, I will call it a tirade the entire time over my Uncle Bob and what he's saying, and how could he bring so much firewood? No one in the world needs this much firewood. Why would he think we need this much firewood for only a couple marshmallows? If you would just think once in a while. Anyone getting flashback memories of similar camping experiences? And so she goes through that whole thing, and my Uncle Bob just stands there with firewood like this the entire time. And he's often a man of few words, and he only needed a few words in this moment. And he looks at my aunt with all of our family there and says, "Shove it, Marilyn." And then he dropped the firewood and walked away. I don't know if I was allowed to say that. We can figure that out later, whether that was permissible on a Sunday morning. But he did. But here's the thing that stuck with me. As dumb as his decision was to buy that much firewood, man, shouldn't that be us? Like in that same moment, our tendency is to go, I have just enough enthusiasm to get through the day. I have just enough passion to get through the moment. And man, wouldn't the model of my uncle be a little bit better? To say like, hey, you may be struggling on getting through your life. Let me tell you this. I've got enough for all of us. Like you may be barely walking through the moment. Here's the deal. I got 4 bundles of firewood with me. I'll get us all through it. Turn to your neighbor. Tell them, bring some firewood. Tell them, bring enough for all of us. Now that is so incredibly important. So this is what Paul tells us we are supposed to do. We're going back to chapter 8, verse 10. So he says, here is my advice, because your passion matters, because fire attracts, because our enthusiasm rubs off on those around us, and it is how we do these things that was always meant to be the model for others else and attract them to the faith. He says, here's the deal. Here is my advice. It would be good for you to finish what you started. It would be good for you to finish what you started. And then Paul gets real practical, and so for just a second, I'm going to get real practical on this. Paul kind of becomes a cheerleader. He said, hey, here's the deal. You've taken steps. Don't stop. Like you've made some decisions. Follow those decisions up with external commitments. You felt something. You've been a part of something. Don't let it die off. Like for some of you, you've accepted Jesus. You need to be baptized. For others of you, you've been baptized. You need to be in a class. For others of you, you've plateaued. Like, and you would look at your faith and you would go, my goodness, like I know at a certain point in time in life, I quit growing vertically, but my faith was never supposed to stunt. My faith was never supposed to completely stop. He says, no, finish what you started. He gets real practical. He says, hey, do something. Do something about it. And then he continues. He says, finish what you started a year ago. Last year, you were the first who wanted to give, and you were the first to begin doing it. Now you should finish what you started. I love this line. Let the eagerness you showed in the beginning be matched now. Let the eagerness you showed in the beginning be matched now. I was really young when I came to faith. I have a Bible. It's a King James version of the Bible because my parents were kind of cruel. I don't know why. They gave it to me when I was 5 because the Bible wasn't already confusing enough, and so all of these thous and thys made it super helpful. But I remember in the Bible, it was that I was age 5 and I prayed this prayer similar to the prayer that we prayed earlier in the service. And I don't know, just be honest with you, like there are parts of my life where I don't really know my life apart from God. I don't have the prodigal story. That's just not part of my story. And so sometimes it is easy for me to take God for granted. And because it's something that I've always known and has always been a part of me, I don't remember what it's like to live my life apart from the grace of God. But here's the thing that is so encouraging to me, is especially in my role, but it's not just my role as a pastor, it's just being a part of a church. I get to watch people I get to talk with people, and I get to hear their stories when they encounter God for the first time. And I got to tell you, when I hear those stories, when people share that, when they live that out, it means everything to me. Because I get to watch with this like newfound emotion, in this newfound joy, in this incredibly new sense of delight, what someone realizes when they realize that the creator of the world died on the cross for their sins, for them to find life, and empowers them to live the life that they were called to live. And it's like someone, when they experience it for the first time, it's like all of a sudden there's energy and there's excitement and there's enthusiasm and there's fire and there's joy. And there are difficulties that they're gonna face, but there's no like, oh, we gotta do this again. Oh, we gotta be a part of that. And things that I so often go through the motions doing and begrudgingly am a part of. There's energy behind it and there's love. And so nothing is difficult in those moments. And that's what Paul is saying. He's saying, hey, no, remember the eagerness with which you started. Remember back in the days when you were so aware of your desperate need for God's grace. He says that should be the thing that fuels you in these very moments within which you're in now. And so, man, if you hear nothing else in this entire series, hear this. If God has done something within you, if there is any hope that you have found, if there is any joy that you've experienced, finish what you started. Don't let it die out. Don't let it fizzle out. That is your responsibility within those moments. God stirs something within our souls, and yet it is our external commitments that then bring it to life and take that flicker and turn it into a flame. And so finish what you started. And the reality is that so many of us, we sink down to the way in which we're pulled in every other direction and we feel that pressure. But here's the thing that you need to see is that passion pulls people to a new standard. That is what our passion was always meant to do. It wasn't meant to sink down. It wasn't meant to be frustrated with different things. It was meant to pull people to a new standard. And so here it is. Some of you are frustrated with your family because your family just bickers. And if you have small kids, that is what you feel over and over again, and I'm sure others feel it as well. Your family just bickers. That is not what you were meant to succumb to. You were meant to be a beacon. And so pull people up to that standard. Don't bicker with them. Don't get frustrated in that moment. Say, no, I'm going to live my passion out in a new way. I'm going to live my faith out in a new way. And you may not understand it right away. You may not get it right away. But eventually you will see that the way in which that I'm living is better. That it's simply a better way of life. Some of you get frustrated with the negativity around you, and your tendency is to sink down to that level. And somewhere along the way, you have this brilliant thought in your brain that if I will just post on social media all my thoughts and frustrations, that somehow I'll make the world a better place. Newsflash, it does not. Instead of sinking down to that level, set a new standard. Pull people up to your level of passion and set a new standard for the way in which we were meant to live. Some of you look at those around you and you go, man, there is no enthusiasm. There's no life here. People just go through the motions. If I could quote John Wesley, he says this, set yourself on fire and people will come for miles to watch you burn. That is how you were called to live. To say the fire that is deep within me is enough for you to see Jesus through me. This is how we were called to live. I told you at the very beginning, I wanted you to have this image in your head of the Olympic torchbearer going through. There is one problem with this image. If you've ever watched the Olympics, you would experience this. That is, the one person runs and they extend their torch out and the other person takes their torch and it is lit and they run off. The person who lit the original torch puts their fire out and they let the fire go on. It's a great image of passing the torch on, except our torch was never meant to go out. It was always meant to stay lit so we could light another, and we could light another, and we could light another. And so some of you need to go this morning, you need to go, hey, it's not enough for me just to have my torch lit. I need to bring 4 bundles of firewood when only a few logs will do. Here's the deal, we may be struggling, but when it comes to passion, some of us need to be able to say, I've got enough for all of us. Until your flame gets lit, I can carry it forward. Let me pray for us. Father, let our passion be a reflection of the joy within us and not the circumstances around us. Let us remember the grace that you have deeply, deeply placed in our hearts and our souls, the grace that you have freely given to us in so many different ways. And let what we felt in the beginning, let the eagerness which animated our actions at one point in time, animate our actions once again. Let us remember deeply, fully, your love. And let us live our lives better because of it. Your fire attracts. Your passion pulls us to a new level. Let us live in the same way. And I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.